The Second Coming of Christ, Part 35. Judas. Greetings, dear children. We will continue to talk about the last few days of Jesus' life, full of joy and pain, determination and sadness, and the usual contradictory feelings for a person before taking decisive steps, as he summarizes all his life on earth. Although Mary is looking forward to this resolution and preparing for these moments, she feels deeply sad. It is hard for her to imagine life without Jesus because she is rarely separated from him. She went all out to try to be strong and peaceful and to maintain her usual satirical behavior, but she did not do very well, and so did Mary's mother. Jesus, he tried his best to calm them down and asked them to remember that he would always be close to them because they would certainly feel it. Now is the time not to consider himself, but to consider the mission he came to earth and must accomplish. He is not afraid to be separated from his life for his teaching, which will save many people, because it will become an island of light in the cruel world of duality. His teaching will become a refuge for souls, because this is the place where they can find peace and harmony, where they will be warmed by the love of the Creator. When they realized how difficult it was to see Jesus' pain, Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene tried to see in him not a husband and son, but an immortal divine person who would help thousands of souls to achieve immortality. This gives them the strength to accept with love the sacrifice Jesus will make. In the next few days, what happened to Jesus was like saying goodbye to his previous life, his disciples and his family. Jesus tried to tell each of them what he had not said before and talked with them wholeheartedly to reassure them. Some of them intuitively felt the upcoming important events and worried about their masters. One day, Jesus gathered his favorite disciples at the holiday dinner, which will be their last supper, because they will never be together again. What Yeshua said that night was a summary of what they had been doing over the years. He thanked them for their dedication to their cause, wished them the fulfillment of their sacred mission and bid farewell to them. Finally, he said a mysterious word. I hope that whatever happens, each of my disciples will fulfill his mission, no matter who he is. When he said this, Jesus paid close attention to Judas and his eyes were filled with love and sympathy. Judas could not bear his eyes, turned around and understood that Jesus knew all about him, and very sincerely worried and regretted that he wanted to die. But everything has been completed and he cannot change anything, because a few days ago he wrote a complaint against Jesus, accusing him of being a liar and impostor. In his condemnation, he wrote that Jesus, with the help of the dark forces, changed people's consciousness. As a result, he became dangerous to society because he did not abide by any human laws. From the first word to the last word, everything in this condemnation is a lie, but Judas, who is owned by his proud and jealous master, wrote it down with a puzzling attitude. His self seems to have been revealed and acted independently, excluding all his kind human qualities from his consciousness. He was afraid of what he had done, but he could not do anything else, because the day before he learned that his complaint had fallen into the hands of Pontius Pilate, whom he was targeting. The Second Coming of Christ, Part 36. El Arresto. Jesus decided not to wait for arrest, and the next morning he went to see Pontius Pilate. In addition, he felt how painful Pilate was to catch his headache after reading the complaint. The guards immediately took him to Pilate's room, where Pilate was mostly lying near an open window of the Ottoman Empire. He felt his head burst and he could not close his eyes all night because the pain did not even stop for a minute. Pilate opened his eyelids with difficulty and looked at Yeshua with a pleading expression in his eyes. Jesus approached silently and put his hand on Pilate's temple. What happened next seemed a miracle to Pilate. He felt a soft and fresh breeze coming from Jeshua's hand, washing away all her pain. He felt physically that it had flowed into the hands of this wonderful man and disappeared without a trace. His face became ruddy and his eyes became lively. Now he looks like a completely different person. Jesus removed his hand from Pilate's temple and said, "This happens because you think it is a lie and you know that you must move on. Once again, you have a choice and your soul suffers." Pontius Pilate, completely stunned, looked at him in silence. He thanked Jesus infinitely because he helped him get rid of this intolerable pain. But he realized that his pain had just begun, which meant that his headache would come back. Pilate felt weak, helpless and completely lost. He sent out a lot of love and spiritual strength with Jesus and did not know how to treat this person. But what Yeshua said next completely puzzled him. Don't think about anything now, you must rest and keep the strength of tomorrow. I will give you some advice to help you relieve your soul. Let my fate be decided by the people gathered in the square. If they want me to die, then let's do it. It will not be your will or your wish. You will sleep quietly and know that you are not guilty of my death." Quotation mark. Pilate was silent for a long time, then whispered, "I will pray to all gods, this will not happen." Then he called the guards and ordered Yeshua to go to prison. He ordered that he be fed and placed in a separate cell. The next day, the usual trial was arranged for 3 criminals who robbed and killed the people, who intimidated the residents of Jerusalem and its surroundings. However, the accusation against Jesus is not the slightest crime in the eyes of the local authorities because he robbed them in different ways. It deprived hundreds of people of power and control and turned obedient citizens into a free and independent people. At that time, public executions were very frequent in the city's main squares, and crowds gathered to watch these terrible performances. The authorities often play so-called democracy and let the crowd decide the fate of the next criminal sentenced to death. This is what Jesus thought when he gave Pilate his very unusual advice. The Second Coming of Christ Part 37, Night Before Execution. Therefore, we are approaching the climax of our story about Christ's first coming. The next morning, Jesus will complete his mission to come to earth. He already knew what the crowd's choice was, because his Father had shown him all his details, brought him to the future, and he left the earth plane. They rehearsed the last act of this sacred work together. Now Jesus only needs to complete his role until the end. He is not afraid of the upcoming execution, because he has mastered the technique of leaving his body and knows that when he is crucified, he will only look sideways without pain or pain. This is exactly the message he wants to convey to his beloved mother and wife when saying goodbye to them. This is especially difficult for her mother because she does not know all the complexity of what is happening. But he knew that his wife Mary was always with her and her daughter. Mary planned to meet Jesus in India immediately after his release. Jesus spent his last night on earth, thinking carefully and not even closing his eyes for a minute. He tried to sum up his whole life, but the more he thought about it, the clearer he saw the great work waiting for his disciples. He realized that what he had done in those years was a drop in the ocean, because duality was deeply rooted in people's consciousness. Like rust, it erodes their consciousness and does not allow them to break the common ideological stereotype. Their struggle with reptiles is not an equal struggle, because they seize and enslave people and make them afraid. He already knew the fate of those who followed his teachings wholeheartedly, because they began to believe in their divinity. Now I must take the last step and show them the miracle of resurrection. This is the sacred symbol of greatness, which will guide millions of people and help them in difficult times, strengthen their spirit and prevent them from falling into despair in the cruel binary world. Dawn was approaching, when the guard entered the room and said Pontius Pilate wanted to see him. Jesus was taken to Pontius Pilate's room. When he first saw him, he realized that he had not slept that night either. He was very pale and tired. Pilate asked Yeshua to share his food with him. Pilate invited Jesus to sit in the garden and wait for them at a table full of food. Pilate himself did not touch the food and continued to look at Jesus as if he were trying to unlock his mysterious veil and understand what troubled him. He wanted to understand why this mysterious man remained so calm and undisturbed, and why he looked at Pilate with love and sympathy, even though he sent him to execution that day. Yeshua, too, reluctantly touched his food and ate only some fruit. It was a strange meal, completely silent, and at last Pilate said, "I am prepared to make any request or wish before you die." Jesus said, "Please allow Mary Magdalene to leave Judea undisturbed and make sure that she and my mother will not be persecuted for the charges against me." Pilate agreed. Yeshua thanked him, bent down and said he wanted to be alone before the execution. Pilate looked at him with a long farewell look and then ordered his guards to take him away. Turning around at the door, Jesus whispered, "Don't feel guilty for me. Everything must be done in this way. I am ready. Goodbye Pontius Pilate, high power is with you." The Second Coming of Christ Part 38 Multiple Trials. Therefore, this day will remain in the annals of human history forever. Jesus left his body while he was still in prison according to the orders of the Father. He is in a very unusual state of consciousness. He seemed to keep his eyes wide open, no one knew, and his twins acted as if nothing had happened. The separation of his human and divine nature has taken place. One of them is left in the space of higher vibration, where there is no physical pain or pain. The other stays on the earth and acts according to the laws of the three-dimensional world. Jesus on the ground obeyed the orders of the guards. They took him to the street and forced him to carry a heavy cross on his shoulder. He must take it to the place of execution. But his invisible twins, who accompanied Jesus through the narrow streets of Jerusalem, did not feel the pain or heaviness of the cross, even though he saw blood on Jesus' back. It is actually similar to a dramatic performance, in which only Jesus is the main actor, playing his role on the earth, but he is also an audience, staying on a subtle plane. The audience of Jesus looked at everything calmly and fully understood the inevitability of what was happening. Only when he saw the tearful eyes of his wife Maria Magdalene and his mother Maria did he make her suddenly return to his earthly body for a moment, and he realized how terrible it had been. He begged them not to take part in the execution, but they could not keep their promise and tried to get as close to him as possible. After great efforts, Jesus left his body again and tried to stop looking at his beloved, so that he could finish his plan with honor. As soon as they arrived at the place where the execution was to be carried out, he understood that there he must maintain complete peace and banish all human feelings. He soon understood the reason. What happened next was like a wild carnival, with the joy of the dark forces in possession. Pilate fully followed Jesus' advice and let the crowd decide the fate of criminals sentenced to death. When praying for each of them, the crowd became crazy and began to shout that Jesus must be crucified first. They found it more strange than thieves and murderers. Therefore, it has aroused inexplicable fear, which in turn has brought them anger and aggression. The people who witnessed the execution were the youngest, the cruelest and the least mentally developed. They want bread and entertainment at all costs, especially bloody performances, which are the food of the dark forces with these people's consciousness. They pardoned one of the confessed criminals and promised that from that moment on, he would continue on the road of justice. But Jeshua, who had watched the wild crowd calmly and peacefully, only brought them hatred and anger. The low-energy avalanche from the crowd hit the unshakable wall of love and goodness around Jesus, reflected in these people, arousing their hatred towards this seemingly strange and therefore dangerous person to them. When his verdict was announced, Jesus saw Pontius Pilate slowly stand up from his chair and leave the execution place. Fearing to repeat a sad experience, he no longer looked at his wife Mary or his mother Mary. He focused all his attention so that he could represent his performance with honor. Today we will stop here. We are the absolute Father and Mother of the universe. We love you. We talk to you through Martha.
The dissemination and circulation of this message are highly recommended. The time has come to radiate on a larger scale these new energies, carriers of joy,